Hi and welcome back to a third session of the Framer Playground course. Today we're going to learn about stagger animations. We're going to use variants that's going to apply from a parent container to the children layers. So that's going to allow us to create this amazing stagger animation where this appears first and then second and then third. So when you do that, it's important to organize your layers properly. So we're going to go to the layers, and here this is going to be our parent container, and then this is the order of how you want things to animate. So usually the last layer is the one that's going to animate first. So you can see this is the first one that I want to appear, and then the second, and then the third. So I'm going to go to the code editor. I'm going to create a new file called Stagger. Let's delete all the code and then import curly braces override from Framer. Now we're going to declare the variants. So const variants is equal to curly braces, and we're going to have two states. The first one is going to be hide curly braces, and we're going to start by changing only the opacity. So opacity is equal to 0. And in comma, we're going to add a different state, which is going to be show, and set the opacity to 1. Next, we're going to create our overrides for both the parent and the children. So export function parent parentheses colon and then use override curly braces return curly braces, and we're going to apply the variants. So variants to variants comma, and we're going to set the initial and the animate properties. So initial is going to be hide, so that at first load it's not going to have any opacity at all. And then we're going to animate that using show. Perfect. Now let's do the children override. So export function children parentheses override curly braces return curly braces, and this time we're only going to need to apply the variants. That's it. So variants is equal to variants. So let's see what's going to happen. I'm gonna go to my layers and then apply the parent container, right? So the parent container is gonna have the override called stagger, and I'm going to apply the parent override. Now for each of the children containers, I can select all of them or one by one, it's up to you. I'm going to apply the override, and for the file stagger, set it to children. We're gonna see, because this is connected to all of these 3 frames, so I can preview this and click play. Now you can see that all of them just appears at once. There's no stagger animation. So let's go back to the code, and then we're going to apply the stagger animations. Now in the show state, right after opacity, I'm going to add comma, so a new property called transition. And for the transition property, I'm gonna set curly braces, and then I'm going to set stagger children to 0. Let's say 2, and you can already see a really nice animation happening. So if I refresh, you're gonna see it. So it comes one after another. Let me make it more obvious by setting 1 second. See, it takes 1 second for each to appear. But the thing is, we have this title, which is the first animation of the children, that appears way too fast, which is why we're gonna need to apply another property called delay children, and we're gonna set it to, let's say, 1 second as well, just to be able to see the results. So this goes first, and then this, and then this. Now this might be a little bit too long, so I'm gonna set it to stagger 0.1 and delay 0.3. So it's a little bit nicer this way. And then what I'm gonna do, I'm going to change the transition for ease. And by the way, if you code line gets too long, you can save it and it's going to format it so that it's easier to write the next properties. So I'm going to write ease and set it to ease in out. So you can use a bunch of these animation curves such as ease in and ease out, for example. After this, I'm going to save to be able to format my code. And again, this is way easier to write. So after this, I'm gonna set duration and set it to 0.8. And now I have a really nice stagger animation. What if I can play with more properties, such as the Y position? So Y, I'm gonna set it to 50 and then add that to the show state as well. So Y, go back to 0 with a comma. And now not only would it use opacity, but it also moves by 50 pixels moving upwards. So you can see again, it's a really nice transition that you're gonna find in a lot of places nowadays, such as the Apple website and on a lot of apps. So that's all you needed to do to create this stagger animation. Now we're gonna go back to the layers and we're going to learn how to set this really nice pagination status. So whenever we move from card to card, so remember that this is a page object that is connected to 3 frames. So that's why we can have this really nice transition between them, and you know, you can customize them. For example, you have these different effects. The one that I really like is the cover flow. So when I transition, it does this really nice 3D effect between the cards. So what I want to do is that when I go to the second card, this will animate to show that I'm on the second card. So this should maybe grow bigger or be colored. So, you know, when I navigate between the cards, it goes to the third and then to the second and then to the first. So let's learn how to do that. All right, so let's go to the code editor, create a new code component. I'm going to call it page, delete all the code. I'm going to close this window for now, and then I'm going to import from framer, and then curly braces, I'm going to bring override, comma, data, because I want to communicate between the parent, which is the page, and also the children layers, which are the little circles. So now I'm going to set the data. So const data is equal to data, parentheses, curly braces, and the only data that I need is using the current, which is by default 0. So this is kind of the index. So by default is going to be the first circle that's going to be active, and so that's why by default we're going to set it to 0. Next, let's set the variance so that we have a enable and disable states for those circles. So const variance is equal to curly braces, set the enable state, and then change the width to 14, height to 14, opacity to 1, and background set it to black. And then for the disable state, so disable curly braces with 8. So basically by default, when it's not the current page, then it's going to be smaller. So with 8, height 8, opacity, it's going to be, let's say, 0.5, and the background, it's going to be white. Great. So now that we have our current page, we have our animation states, we just need to create, first of all, our overrides, but also we need to find the event at which we want to listen to the page change. So first of all, we're gonna set the override for the page. So export function page override curly braces, and then set return curly braces. We're gonna listen to the event called onChange page. So that is provided to the page component. And then using this parentheses, current, so that's the props, and using the props from this event, we're going to change our data. So data.current is equal to current. Next, let's set the circles. So export function circle1 parentheses override curly braces return curly braces. Now let's apply the animations for the variants. So animate, we're gonna use the condition, and it's gonna say data.current is equal to 0. So we're asking the question, is this equal to 0? And if yes, then we're gonna set the animate to the variant called enabled. And using the column, we're setting the else statement. So else, we're gonna set to disable. Then let's not forget to apply the variants to this override. Now at this point, I want to create a circle for each of them, and we're gonna have to create 4 of them because we have 4 circles. So one thing you can do is just do a copy and paste, and there's a shortcut in most code editors where you can just select the entire thing, so the entire function from export to the finishing curly braces, and you can press on Shift Option and then down arrow, and you do that so that we have 4 of these overrides. The last thing that we need is just to change the name. So it's going to be circle 2, circle 3, circle 4. And then we have to change the condition as well. So if data.current is equal to 1, is equal to 2, and is equal to 3. Now the reason why we're starting with 0, that's how the index work in programming. So with this setup, we're gonna go to the layers and we're gonna find the page component, and it has to be a page component because that's how we know we can get the unchanged page event. And we're gonna set the override and go to the file called page and set it to page. Now for the other layers, so this is a different layer and it's inside a stack, and it doesn't matter how you want to set it up as long as each of these layers will listen to this event using the overrides. So the first circle, I'm gonna set, actually I can just set all of them at the same time. So set the page, set to circle 1. And then from here, I can just go to each of them one by one. So this one is actually circle 2, this one is circle 3, and this one is circle 4. Alright, so let's preview this. Click play. And let's take a look. Nice. So you can see the animation right here. It's changing, right? And it creates this beautiful animation at the same time using a change of width and height. So let's go back to the code. You can see that the animation that we're applying is the opacity and also the color, as well as the width and the height. And obviously you can play around with whatever you want, different animations for the scale or the Y positioning or the X positioning. You can do really cool stuff with this technique. Before moving on, I'm just gonna set this to white as well, since we have the opacity right here. So it's gonna change. We have a nice white color and it just moves like that. It's really nice. You can of course change to your custom color and create something that is unique to you. Alright, so the last thing I want to show you today is how to create sequence animation, meaning that I want to order my animation so that they wait after one another before going to the next. So let's close this and create a new code component called sequence. I'm going to delete everything and import from framer, and before from I'm gonna set curly braces so that I can use auto completion, override, comma, and then use animation. So this one right here. So use animation is gonna allow you to have more control on the timing of your animation and when to use it. Now let's create an override for the first button in that screen that we showed earlier. So export function button1 parentheses override curly braces return curly braces. So first of all, we're going to declare our animation control using useAnimation. So const animation is equal to useAnimation parentheses. Then we're going to apply that to our override to the button. So animate animation. Then we have to write the event, and the event is going to be a tap event. As we remember, it's untap parentheses curly braces, and this is where we're going to do something about the animation. First of all, we're going to set up our function so that we can call from here, and the function is going to be written here. So function sequence parentheses curly braces, and this function has to be different from asynchronous so that we can wait for things to run before going to the next. So in front of function, I'm going to write async, and then inside the function, so inside the curly braces, I'm going to write await. Await means that it needs to wait for this line of code before running the next line of code. So await animation, so the animation here, and you can start the animation doing like this. So animation start parentheses. Inside the parentheses, we're gonna set the animation properties. So curly braces, and I'm gonna set the Y position to -10. So it's gonna move up a little bit. And then next, I'm going to do another animation after this one. So await animation dot start parentheses curly braces, and then I'm going to have a different animation. So this time I'm gonna set the Y position to 200. So what should happen is that it's gonna move up a little bit, and then after that is finished, then it's gonna move down by 200. The last thing is that I need to call this function using the event on tap. So sequence parentheses. One thing to note is that whenever you use await, you have to be inside a function that is asynchronous. So let's go ahead and test that. We're gonna go to the layers, and here I'm going to apply this to the button 1. So I'm gonna go to override, change this to sequence, and set it to button 1. So let's test this. Click on play, and now when I click here, it jumps up and then it goes down afterwards. Cool, so that's how you do sequence animation, and you can obviously change and add more animations. So I'm gonna go back to the code editor, and let's say I want to also rotate 10 degrees, and I want to change the opacity to 0 when it starts falling. So you're gonna see that it goes up and then it rotates a little bit and it fades. Cool, so to finish this, why don't we create something totally useless? So I'm gonna click on the first button, and after it falls, and then something is going to happen to the second button. So we're gonna put in practice what we've learned, such as the data, the sequencing, and all of that stuff. Alright, so we're gonna need to import data, and we're gonna set a data state. So const data is equal to data parentheses curly braces. We're going to set a boolean has tap to false by default. Then we're going to set the variance, which is essentially what we're doing here, minus the sequencing. So const variance is equal to curly braces, and we're going to have a height state. In the height state, we're going to have, let's say, a Y positioning from 0, and then let's make sure to have a comma right here. Set the show state, then set the Y position to 200 as well. Finally, let's create the override for the second button. So export function button 2 parentheses override, then return and set variance to variance, comma, set animate and we're gonna use again the condition. So data.hasTab question mark. If true, we're gonna set to show for the variant, and else we're gonna set to hide. So very simple stuff. The only thing that's missing is that at the end of our animation for the first button, we're going to call the animation for the second button by changing the data to true. So right after await, we're going to set data hasTab is equal to true. That's it. So we're gonna go and connect our second button to that new override. So I'm gonna select this, set it to sequence, and set it to button 2. And once that is done, what is supposed to happen is that when I click on the first button, after the button has fallen, then the second button is going to follow right afterwards. So click here, and then this one falls after. So this animation is absolutely useless in this context, but I did that because I ran out of components to have overrides on, but it's actually really useful. So for example, let's say you're swiping a bunch of cards and you're dropping the card, and after the drop, you want to go to a new screen, for example. So this technique can be useful in that context. Awesome, so I hope you enjoyed this session with me where we learn how to stagger the animation. We have this really nice intro, fade in, and a moving of the Y position. We also learn how to apply the unpage change event where I go to the next card and it changed my circles right here by using variants and data. And finally, we learn this absolutely useless interaction where when we click on this first button, it animates and sequences the animations one after another and then move on to the second button's animation. So click here and then this jumps one after another. Well, it's been a pleasure to teach you these animation techniques. In the next session, we're going to learn how to build a code components from scratch. So we're not going to use overrides, and like that, we're going to have more control over the entire canvas. We're going to learn how to import design components and then manipulate those design components inside a code component. With that, we're going to create even more powerful interactions for your prototype. So I'll see you in the next session. Thank you.